and welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today I have with me Cody Pondsmith. If you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hey there, my name's Cody Pondsmith. I am the creative director at Arthur Games and also the lead designer on Shadowscar RPG. I'm here to talk about Shadowscar and Witcher and Cyberpunk and my life in general, I suppose. Not sure why anyone wants to know, but happy to talk about it.
I read over Shadowscar, which is the new game that you are releasing, and if you back it, you can get the copy of the PDF. By the time you hear this, we're probably towards the end. Maybe I'll probably release this in the last weekend of funding for Shadowscar. And before I get into what I noticed about both the quick start and general design theory and things about the book itself, I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite design aspect of Shadowscar and why?
My favorite design aspect of Shadowscar has got to be sort of the stealth mechanics. It is I think it's kind of the bread and butter of the system because it facilitates the ninja RPG aspects of the game. We focus very heavily on basically facilitating that gameplay structure of stealth, where you can sneak in and out of places. A lot of the game requires you to counteract special senses like night vision and keen hearing and things like that, so you can get up to your opponents. And we give you what's called the assassinate action, which is our way of kind of allowing you to stay in stealth. One of the biggest problems I find in games that have stealth as an option is that it works fine up until you have to interact with another character. It's the classic, you're playing a rogue in something like D&D or something like that. You sneak up on somebody and they're totally unaware of you. They're asleep in their bed, and you take out your dagger and you stab them in the heart, and you do your sneak attack damage, but you don't do enough damage to kill them, and they wake up and then immediately a fight starts. And you're kind of left, in my sort of experience, they're kind of going, I did everything right. Why is this happening? I did everything right. So Shadowscar uses an assassination mechanic, which if you can get into that situation, if you can get up on your opponent without them knowing you're there, you can outright kill them. You get one check to make against them. If you succeed, if they're of a higher tier, they get to make a check back to see if they can defend. But if they fail that check, they die. Doesn't matter how powerful they are, with a few exceptions. You can take out basically anybody with the assassinate action, which means you can stay in stealth, and it really allows you to feel like, the shadow assassin, shinobi fantasy, as it were.
For the game itself, I did notice that there's a big aspect of the game is covering on stealth, and I wanted to know, because you dedicated so much time in the core book to really focus on that, for future releases, are you going to be expanding on stealth in the game?
We don't want to expand on it too much, because if we go a lot further than where we are right now, it starts to grind. We have tried to make it as easy to play as possible. And in my experience and kind of looking at it from a game design perspective, if we add too much more to it, it will start to slow down gameplay. So we don't have a whole lot of plans to expand the stealth mechanics, though there will definitely be some expansions just based on the nature of bringing in new enemies and things like that. We obviously bring in yokai, monsters from Japanese myth, and a lot of them just have weird abilities. So there are aspects of the stealth mechanic that are expanded on by the necessity of those monsters' abilities. Like in the core rulebook, we talk about a creature called a satori, which is kind of like a humanoid ape that can read minds. And one of its abilities is that it can sense thoughts within 50 feet. So that provides another sort of aspect, another avenue of stealth that you have to deal with. So I don't have any big plans, but there will probably be some yokai and some enemies in the future that necessitate other methodologies of stealth.
The other big aspect of the game that I noticed was the world hopping aspect of it. And within the core book, there are 5 uh, basic worlds slash settings. One of them, notably, which I found to be really interesting, was a movie set for a 1920s, 1930s. What was that era? Prohibition era style gangsters, right? Can you talk about why you picked those in particular? I think they are spread out enough in theme and tone. Like you have a cyberpunk space one, you've got the movie set one, there's a Grand Victorian Empire, and then you have a more traditional Japanese style influenced one. But could you talk about what you liked about as far as the settings and why you think they work for your game specifically?
So the four core settings in Shadowscar as of sort of release now um, are designed to give different experiences. All of them are worlds that I had built for my home games back when I was running Shadowscar with my friends. And all of them were kind of designed to give a different experience. So Nikazukuni is kind of the core of the experience. It is where all this stuff comes from. It's where you get the ninjas and the yokai and, you know, the agency and all of this. It's the kind of core, like, fantasy Japan kind of a setting. And it provides interesting opportunities in the form of, you know, delving into the ruins of the 100 Years of Sorrow, the big war that happened, or, you know, negotiating the sort of aristocratic politics of early 17th century Japan, but augmented by the presence of, you know, spirits and things like that. Steel Court, which is the Victorian setting, was designed off of my early love of steampunk, and it's designed to be sort of a less romanticized version of that sort of aesthetic. So it is a setting that takes place in the mid to late 19th century, right as we're seeing a lot of sort of industrial expansion. And it gives you this sort of combination of like the steampunk fantasy with airships and, you know, fantastical steam technology and things like that, but kind of merged and augmented with sort of the real nature of England in that time period, which is, you know, this weird dichotomy of, you know, high technology and science and things like that, combined with a fascination for the occult and death, and this tremendous class struggle between, you know, the aristocracy and the working class and the poor. So it gives you that sort of combination of like high fantasy, sort of steampunk, and Sherlock Holmes and all that sort of situation. The third setting, Fifth Street, which is the sort of pulp noir movie set world, is designed to be the most sort of bombastic of the settings. It's the setting where you can get away with big, flashy sort of adventures. The world is roughly akin to America in 1929, right before the Great Depression, and still in the midst of Prohibition. There is sort of this laissez-faire, live fast, die young mentality among people that, of course, will eventually lead to the Great Depression. There's, you know, organized crime all over the place. In Fifth Street, everything is larger than life. So we have not just regular organized crime, but we have sort of like teetering on the brink of being supervillain organized crime, and the Guardian Agency, which is this sort of organization of pulp superheroes. And the entire world is augmented by this thing called the narrative, which is a otherworldly force that changes the world around the players to make it more narratively interesting. So Fifth Street was designed to be sort of this like larger than life. This is where you can have fast car chases and, you know, fist fights on top of trains and stuff like that. And then Refuge, which is the last setting, which is this future setting, was designed partially as sort of a warning to the players, because this is the world where the agency wasn't there to do anything to stop the yokai. It's this world where the Earth has been blighted and basically wiped out, and the last remaining humans are living on a space station and a lunar colony orbiting the Earth with really only vague ideas as to what happened to their planet. So it's this setting that is in the midst of a massive cultural war almost between the people who are dedicated to the idea of returning to Earth someday or trying to re-terraform the planet or something like that, and the people who have given up on Earth, maybe because they never cared that much, or maybe because they were never on Earth, they were born in space, who believe that moving on requires them to abandon Earth and find a new planet to colonize. So there's a combination of sort of the back and forth of those two ideologies, along with the underlying sort of collective trauma that came about when Earth was effectively destroyed, and this lunar colony and the space station were forced to become self-sufficient. And during that time period, the Lunar Council, which was sort of the government agency, became this fully authoritarian government, because it was necessary, quote unquote, to save the species. So people are now living with this long period of authoritarian rule in the past that had led to all of these unfortunate problems in the present. But Refuge is designed to be this sort of setting that shows what happens if you don't succeed, while also providing an interesting sort of world that you wouldn't see anywhere else. It's the only setting in Shadowscar that doesn't rely heavily on a pre-established history. It is in the future, and it gives you this interesting sort of what would happen if idea moving forward into a more grounded science fiction setting.
Yeah, my read of it, and I don't like. I would imagine that there's more information in the core book when it releases in the quick start. I'm getting a nod from Cody on that, but the way that I'm reading it right now, and based on my skim of one of the adventures that takes place within Refuge, it seems like it really plays well into space horror as well. What are your thoughts on space horror as well, for that setting, and Shadowscar in general?
I think that a lot of aspects of Shadowscar can resonate with horror in general. I think it will largely depend on how your GM runs it, but Shadowscar is a game where you are fighting monsters, and you are fighting monsters that are controlled by this not entirely unknowable, but this sort of larger than human force, this afterlife, this creation of the, not even creation of the gods, that existed sort of at the same time as the gods in Nakatsukuni. So, that lends itself to a lot of horror aspects, and there are a lot of pretty horrifying yokai. One of the yokai we talk about in the starter set and then later in the core book is the Nekomata, which is this big cat-like yokai that has control over the dead. And one of the things it can do in Shadowscar, as it has evolved with the times and been influenced by Yomi, the afterlife, is if it kills someone, it can peel off their face and make that face into a mask that allows it to pretend to be that person. So there's a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of interesting possible horror ideas that can be played in Shadowscar. And Refuge adds another layer in that everywhere you go in Refuge, you are technically under some amount of danger. Even on the lunar colony, if the colony gets depressurized, you could wind up getting sucked out into space where you will die. And the same thing goes with the station, the space station. So you are constantly under some amount of threat, and you are, much like being in a submarine, thousands of leagues under the sea. There's a constant understanding that the environment you're in is hostile. And that can lead to, threats to depressurize the station. That can lead to spacewalks where you have to go out of the ship and, possibly fight yokai in the depths of space. It lends itself, I think, to a bit of the sort of almost alien like horror concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you end up playing a lot of horror games while you were developing this latest version of Shadow Scar with those things in mind?
I actually didn't. I have a good gaming group. We play every Sunday, but we tend to play one game at a time. So while I've read through like Alien RPG and a few other games that might be more considered horror RPGs, I haven't really gotten to play them, which is a shame because they look very interesting. Um, but I spent a lot of time listening to like online horror stories and true crime and stuff like that while I was developing Shadow Scar, and I'm sure that that probably had some influence on the larger design and narrative of Shadow Scar.
Yeah, I can't remember where I heard you say this, but there was some. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you did mention Vampire the Masquerade as having some similarities with the Veil and making sure that the group or the player characters are concealing their influence or being not known amongst the population.
I didn't really pull from that as far as the veil or anything like that. Really, the concept of maintaining the veil and keeping the this veil war from the populace is pulled directly from the fact that it's kind of a secret agent game, and
MI6. Yeah, gotcha.
yeah. So
Okay.
as a secret agent, you kind of have to keep all this stuff secret
Hmm.
from the populace. And we talk about why that is in a little bit more in the core book. We talk about like what has happened in the past when that veil has been broken, and what the consequences of that were. So actually, I played VTM for a while. I think it was probably like 10 or 12 sessions, but it was a very good game. The thing that kind of stood out for me about Vampire was the actual core mechanic. It was the first time I had played a dice pool mechanic, and it was very cool. I really developed a love for the dice pool mechanic in general because it is so accessible. It's something that you can pick up and play without really a lot of learning per se. There's not as much additive math and stuff like that. And I've seen dice pools used in other games in very similar ways. So when I worked on Shadow Scar, I wanted something that would capture the same ease of play. So I drew from Vampire, I drew from other games that I had seen with dice pool systems to build the sort of dice pool mechanic in Shadow Scar.
That sort of, I think, resonates with one of the biggest difficulties think that most developers have with getting their game out there is like how easy is it to learn and play the first time? How much of that was in your mind as you're developing this latest version of Shadow Scar? Like how much of it was meant to be just easy to jump into right away?
It's a difficult balance, because every piece of further design makes a game less approachable. Everything you have to add to the game makes it harder for somebody to learn. But at the same time, you kind of have to add things to the game to add concepts. So, to add in the all the stealth feeling that I wanted to put into Shadow Scar, I had to add stealth mechanics. And that inherently makes it more difficult to learn. So, it was a difficult balance of trying to keep things approachable while still building the setting pieces and the system pieces necessary. But I tried to keep as close to something that could be, learned quickly or at least picked up fairly fast once you have the core concepts in mind. This isn't going to be as easy to pick up as like a Powered by the Apocalypse game or something in that vein, but that's because it has more tailored system to give you a specific experience. So, I think where we came out is probably somewhere around the level of like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, where it will take a little bit from here and there, until you kind of get a core idea, but it picks up quickly and it should be pretty, my experience from what people have said, once you played it once or twice, it's pretty second nature.
Yeah, it looks similar enough, especially if you've played Cyberpunk. And the same goes for Witcher. Those mechanics sort of cross over in a lot of ways. Sometimes there's a little bit, there's a couple of additive things it looks like, but the one mechanic that I was interested to talk to you about from a narrative standpoint was rift diving, which is the moving for our audience, moving between the different worlds. And I wanted to ask for GMs and materials that they can use. Are you planning to develop a world builder guide, or is that going to be included in the core book, or how would you like to approach that?
In the core book, we actually are going to talk about how to put your own worlds into Shadowscar. We have a small section of the storytellers chapter that is basically dedicated to, how to appropriately translate things in your desired world into the Mosaic system, which is the core system for Shadowscar, and how to make the lore of your world fit into the larger lore of Shadowscar. Down the road, I would like to do like a dedicated sort of world builder. And I have some ideas for that already, but it does pose an interesting problem because it is so complicated. World building itself is not easy, as anybody who's tried it will say. There are so many little aspects that you have to take into account, but I feel pretty confident that we could put together a basic world building path. Something that can give you 75% so you can fill in the last 25% yourself.
That would be my only like reticence to, I think, running Shadowscar would be, what if they fail their check moving between this world and this world, which are established worlds? What if they end up in a random world and then like, okay, well, I'm developing this world as we progress in this session. Of course, you can prepare them beforehand, but I thought that was a potentially interesting problem for a GM to have that they wouldn't normally have, except in a high level D&D campaign, for instance, or another game like that. I have to ask, so about a little bit about your history, about you developing the game. You started working on this when you were a kid, 11 years old, was it?
11.
11 years old. And so when, not to ask you directly what your age was, but I'm wondering where in the Naruto run this started development. Like, because I have like the dates for Naruto anime, which was 2002 to 2007, right? Had you had you already, like, how deep into Naruto were you when you started developing this?
I want to say I was partway into the Chunin exams arc. Because they had introduced Gaara as a character by that point. I remember thinking about how to make his jutsu work in a game. I'm pretty sure we were partway into the Chunin exam arc.
Gotcha.
That would have been second arc, I think.
When you're developing a game that has a very strong anime influence, how did you approach recreating that anime vibe? Or like, how are you looking at your mechanics differently than a game like The Witcher, which has different source material, like a fictional dark fantasy?
I think for a lot of Shadowscar, it was mostly working off vibes and trying to get something that felt appropriate. So there's a lot of sort of iterative design of making something, running it, seeing whether it felt appropriate, and then running it again. And I did a lot of that over my sort of, childhood and like teen years, because I was running this basically constantly with all of my friends all the time. So a lot of it was kind of trying to work on something that felt appropriate in my home games. But then there are aspects of like, little things that go all the way to like how many actions you get and how we do dual wielding, where, if you're playing a character who dual wields swords, you can attack like 4 times on your turn. which is there to sort of mimic that like anime flurry of blows type sort of like yeah bringing in concepts of the Mikyo, the magical techniques, in very much the same way as like Naruto's jutsu and things like that. A lot of it is taking these anime concepts that I would sort of osmose from the anime that I was watching at the time or that I knew about at the time, and kind of trying to make those work in the larger system. So I guess it isn't like I had as much of like a sit down and work it out, as much as I would run across something and then I would find a way to put that into the system, and then it would evolve and change from there. And then I'd find something else and I'd kind of find a way to tinker that into the system, and so on and so forth.
Designing on vibes. The other thing that I wanted to ask specifically about the design of Shadow Scar was, what others sort of Japanese or other East Asian media did you think were a strong influence on the book?
Obviously I drew a lot from anime. I in earlier years, I watched a fair amount of like Chinese action films like Kung Fu Hustle, Shaolin Soccer, things like that, which I think came in a little bit, and samurai films and things like that. In recent years, there hasn't been quite as much, like directly. So it'd be a little hard to say there. Mostly a lot of the influences were anime based.
Gotcha. I was gonna say, if you said Shogun, I was like, oh man, that's one of my favorite media pieces of like the last decade has been Shogun. I've really enjoyed. I don't know if you're a fan, but I'm a mega fan. I'm so excited for season 2. But so about you personally, why do you think anime had such a strong influence on you as a kid growing up?
I think I grew up in a family that liked anime inherently. My parents were big anime fans at a kind of period where anime was just sort of starting to be introduced to America. And so I kind of grew up on it inherently. But also, I think with that, there were a lot of sort of touchstone animes that were coming out as I was growing up. And I think in the same way, I would say that sort of my generation was like a second wave of anime, where like suddenly anime was more there. It was more commonplace. We had things like Dragon Ball and Pokemon, Digimon, and all of these, sort of like almost like second wave anime. So it was just more prevalent in my life. And as I grew up, there were things like there was a big anime push on Cartoon Network with Toonami.
Mm-hmm.
And I think anime was just so like ubiquitous in my life in places that I was. So I kind of became part of my sort of understanding of things almost as like a second nature, as I just ran across stuff that I liked.
Yeah, and even when I check not only just the work that your dad did back in the day when he was first developing cyberpunk, using the inspiration of the novel that it's not Neuromancer, it's the other novel of cyberpunk. There's a lot of Japanese influence within the media itself, within cyberpunk just generally as a genre. So I had a feeling, but that your dad is also an anime nerd and like enjoys a lot of Japanese cultural stuff. But that's great. So moving from Shadow Scar, I want to talk about the Kickstarter. Anything that you wanted people to know about the Kickstarter if they're listening and they're considering Shadow Scar?
So we're keeping things very simple on the Kickstarter, because we've had situations in the past where we got way out of hand. So the Kickstarter is designed to be very straightforward. We want to get the book out to people. We can come in at a fairly low tier, like $19, to get a copy of the PDF, which we'll send out pretty much the moment that fulfillment begins. So you'll have it basically November 1st, November 2nd. And from there, you can get a copy of the core rulebook for a bit more, and it'll give you a PDF as well. And then you can get a copy of the core rulebook and the starter set, as well as the PDFs for both of those. So very straightforward. We want to provide the game experience. We are kind of going over the history of Shadowscar and the updates. So we actually we're going to be giving a lot of sort of insight into how the game developed over the years as we talk about it, and a little bit more of why the system works the way it does. So it'll give sort of that internal view. One of the other cool things that we're going to be talking about is our DLC program. Every month, at the beginning of the month, we release free downloadable content for Shadowscar and Cyberpunk on our website. So you can get new little bits of content, adventures, new gear, new techniques, new yokai, things like that are coming out basically every month, just for a little bit of fun extra content throughout the year. That we're always excited to talk about, but not everybody else knows that we do it. So it's exciting to be able to tell people about it.
Yeah, I would say that's, besides the fact that I love the Cyberpunk Red, one of my favorite aspects as a GM that our Telsarian Games does is that you guys provide so much additionally just to people. Like, you can just go on their website. There's an entire DLC subheading that you can go under, and there's just tons and tons and tons of free stuff. All the stuff that, as I understand it, for some of the publications, made the publication a little bit too big for printing purposes and costs and things. So they just end up like an additional 20 to 40 pages every time you guys release something. And there's so much community content available for our Telsarian Games that I'm just kind of, and I'm still really diving into that with, in regards to both Cyberpunk and then The Witcher. There's just so much stuff out there. So it seems like, unlike other publishers who, remain unnamed, and I think people, of course, should be paid for their work. I'm a big proponent of that. But you do get a lot for what you pay for at our Telsarian Games. You can buy the core book, and then there's all this stuff online that you can use, as opposed to buying core book, player's handbook. In addition to that, maybe you have to buy a very large adventure book, or you have to buy all these additional things when they come out with new subclasses and things like that. So that has been something that I think is probably one of the biggest selling points, I think, for our Telsarian Games as a publisher. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that. That's one of my favorite things as a pro GM, is just there's just so much stuff out there.
I want to give... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just trailing off. Go ahead.
We want to give people their money's worth, as it were. One of the big things that's always important for us at Telstorian is that we don't want to like gouge people for products, and that's not to say other people are doing so. I'm just saying that as a company value, we try to put as much good stuff into our books as possible. And yeah, when we can't fit that all into one book, we like to give it out in DLCs and things like that. But we also like to just, I can't count the number of times that we've just sat down and said, like, okay, we want to give them something cool this month. What cool thing could we give them? What interesting, downloadable content could we put out there, and, sit down and work that out. Like, recently, the most recent DLC we did for Shadowscar was narrative intrusions. So we have the narrative, this mysterious force in 5th Street, and we did a 9 or 10 page downloadable piece for last month that was just, here's a bunch of different ways you can use the narrative in your games, and here's some plot lines that could be tied to it, and a story generator. So it's just a fun little thing about an aspect of the world. So we try to provide interesting stuff.
Now that there is a Cyberpunk anime, I have to ask you, did you like it?
Oh, I loved it. I got a little bit of a weird experience because we got a pre-showing, as it were, of it,
Okay.
where we met up with our partners from Poland in a little like hotel conference room in our home state, and we got to watch all of it, but we got to watch all of it in like a day. Um,
Oh wow.
so we sat down and just like binge watched all of Edge Runners. Um, and it was great. We had a great time. But it was like it was all this that everybody experienced over like a period of time, but like in one day.
Right.
Um,
That's intense.
and it was an emotional roller coaster, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I love it. I've always loved Trigger. They do some really good stuff, and I was super pleased to see what they did with Cyberpunk because it felt really. I mean, it really felt like the video game, and thus it felt very much like Cyberpunk that I know. Um, and the characters were great, and the story is solid. It's very sad, but a lot of Cyberpunk is just like that. It is sad. Um, it is not a nice world per se to live in. So it's nice to see that, and I give them a lot of credit for not pulling their punches on that because they could have, they could have given it a happy ending, but they didn't, and I respect that.
Yeah, when I first watched it, I thought to myself, like, I think it was a very good decision by the studio to tell that type of story because it was very fundamental cyberpunk in which there are usually not happy endings for people who get involved in the game, and the game being like us versus the corporations, or trying to, use the lifestyle that you lead generally, regardless, the corporation comes out on top kind of feel to cyberpunk. So there is that dystopian aspect to it. Um, so I really enjoyed it, but I have to ask, like, did they do, do you watch dubs or subtitles?
I watch subtitles.
Okay.
Um, I'm not a purist about it, let's say, but
Right.
I generally go for subtitles.
Yeah, I've done the watch on the dub. I think the next time I watch it, I'll watch it with subtitles, just to see kind of the difference. But no, about Edge Runners, I really felt like they did a good job of capturing also some aspects of the whimsy that are present within the cyberpunk um, game, and some of the ways that players interact with the system and still try to find things that are both funny and very like camp, but camp in a fun way, with the world and how they interact with it, despite it being a dystopian environment. So I thought, yeah, I agree. They did a really good job.
I think that's a key aspect of cyberpunk that often gets overlooked is that there is there's some weird stuff in there that is a little campy, that is weird, ranging all the way from the sort of horrific, like the bozos, the clown gang of cyberpunk,
Right.
who are in most circumstances people who have gotten body modifications to physically be clowns, and they go around playing pranks on people, but those pranks can range from squirting flowers to locking them in elevators with starving rats, um, and are well known throughout Night City as just a terrifying force of chaos. All the way down to gangs like the Philharmonic Vampires, which are just a bunch of people who dress up like vampires and play pranks on people and do like opera and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and it underscores the fact that there's a big element of cyberpunk that lives in this world of like, if you have the money, you can do it. So,
Hmm.
no matter what it is, if you have the money, you can do it. And that means that there could be some absolutely terrible things, some truly horrific things like making your body into a killing machine, or, paying to hunt humans or whatnot. But there can also be just weird, I've always wanted to do this wild thing and now I have the resources to do it. So there is that range of sort of horror to whimsy in cyberpunk that I think is kind of part of what makes it more interesting than if it were purely bleak.
So, not to get into any salacious gossip or anything, but as someone who has worked alongside a studio in regards to the Witcher IP, and then perhaps in some ways the Cyberpunk IP, what's some of the pros and cons between designing on your own and then working with a studio who's not necessarily even in a tabletop, but is a different type of media company?
There are pros and cons for both, obviously. Um, and a lot of it comes down to sort of the nature of communication and cooperation. One big pro of working on something yourself is that you have, unilateral choice about what happens. Working on something that you built from the ground up and you're not working with any collaborators, you can do anything you want functionally, as long as it's not illegal. So you don't really have to consider what other people are, have to do or have to say about it or anything like that, and you can really make exactly the thing you were looking at. But at the same time, that can be a problem because you can get a lot of really good ideas from collaboration. There are a lot of times when you might have a really dumb idea on your own, but if you run that dumb idea past somebody else, you can get that input that makes it, takes it from being a dumb idea to being a great idea. On the other hand, though, working together with especially a very large corporation, like in our situation with CD Projekt, the scale of the projects and the timelines can be quite a problem in a lot of circumstances. You could wind up in a situation where you get, frozen for a little bit because, your partner is on a different project, or they are having to work out something very specific about the project they're working on, and you need to wait until they finish working out that thing. So that can lead to delays and things like that, which can make it a little more difficult to get through the sort of design process. But once again, on the other hand, working with a much larger company can be very interesting because you can see a lot of different angles to the project. We kind of learned a lot and determined a lot about Cyberpunk Red through getting sort of sneak peeks of Cyberpunk 2077. And, from another standpoint, it's very just like purely very cool to see that sort of evolution of the product, to be able to see ideas that we had in tabletop rendered in a video game. There's really, you can't explain exactly how cool that is until you've been there, So it's a trade-off, definitely. The key concept is just that you need to work out really good communication.
I totally relate to working with other people and like, hey, I have this idea, but I don't feel like I'm the best to either communicate this or design this, and I need someone's opinion whom I trust to come in and like give me some pointers or like show me a different perspective on how we can make this work. I fully stand behind, and I speak for myself, but like I always try to hire people smarter than me because I end up learning so much when I'm working with people who are like resident experts in their field or who have much different perspectives than me. I wanted to ask you along that vein for Witcher, and I read a little bit provided in the about the author in the core book for Witcher. You might consider yourself something of a Renaissance man because you do everything that you learn the skills a little bit, or you perform the skills in order to test and like, does this mechanic feel that way? So I would ask you what your process is normally, or what it was for The Witcher itself, and how you went about that for our audience to hear about.
I would hesitate to call myself a Renaissance man, but I do really dumb things to figure out how they work. A lot of a lot of Witcher, because it was the first thing I'd ever worked on, was done on vibes.
Mhm.
It was entirely, how does this feel? Does it feel right? How can I make it feel appropriate? Um, and a lot of that is sort of having the experiences. So, as I mentioned in the about the author section for core book, I did stuff like try to cross draw two swords from your sides and cut my thumb, because it turns out that if you cross draw two swords across each other, you are liable to slice yourself. I tried to fire two arrows out of the same bow at the same time, which does work. It's just not very accurate. Um, I sat down with the ingredients for I think it was the werewolf decoction and the wyvern oil or draconid oil in Witcher, and tried to make both of those. Which is where I learned that you need to treat your oils in some way, because if you just do what they give you in the ingredients, then they congeal and you can't get them out of the bottle. And also, I had the experience of chopping up and boiling pork liver and herbs in vodka to try and make the decoction that they had, which did not turn out well. Um, so I can truly understand why Geralt doesn't like drinking potions. But all of that was done because I wanted to feel the experience. Um, and I think that you can't really copy that. There's something really, really worthwhile to having had that experience, because then you can actually write about it in the most accurate way possible. Um, so, I try to go out of my way to find those experiences so that I can then write about them as accurately as possible. So that was kind of a big part of working on Witcher. And a lot of the rest was just sort of trying to find a way to write system around those ideas in such a way that it supported them. Now that I know I can fire two arrows out of the same bow at the same time, how do I make a system that fits with my understanding of how that happens? And so a lot of it was ground up. What do I feel first, and then what do I build on top of that?
For your development of both like the world book aspects of the core book, and detailing everything from like Redania to down to Sintra, how much of your research fell back on folklore that the original source material was based on, as opposed to the source material, or did you solely go off the source material in order to find inspiration for and the information that you needed to present all of this?
In most circumstances, we went from the source material. There's a lot of Witcher source material, and we are able to pull from it pretty consistently to build what we had in the core book. We only really touch on a lot of those countries in about a page of content. So that allowed us to kind of distill down what we knew from the source material into a sort of easily digestible format. In a lot of cases from there, when we had to expand on things like ebbing or Metna or things like that, we actually drew a little bit more on regional histories and sort of the histories of other countries. Because in a lot of cases, those countries could be related to or sort of compared to another country, often European, that we could draw little bits from here and there. The world lore, the folklore, really came in more in a combination of sort of the magic and the monsters of the setting. Where, as we sort of started building out from just the established canon of Witcher, we started drawing on other European, especially folklores, to get new ideas, both being at monsters that we could draw from folklore, and also magic that we could build around it. Like when we were working on Tome of Chaos, James Hutt and I sat down and we got a few books on folk magic and things like that. And we sat there and went over all of these like folk magic books, trying to find things that would be interesting to put into Tome of Chaos as new rituals or hexes or things like that. Um, so there's a certain amount of research there into real folk magic and stuff. But a lot of the sort of key material, especially in the core book, just came from the established canon that we already have.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to. I haven't run it yet. I had the opportunity to play it over the weekend. I really think the system has some strong points, especially in regards to horror games. I think that is really well done as far as what you can present and the investigation part of doing the Witcher type stuff. And I think that aspect is very good. As far as finding out like what are the signs of this creature that you're hunting or you're looking for or that is terrorizing this village, and you can sort of you can start to lamplight these things over the course of the adventure. And it looks like the classes have a good spread of different abilities that would actually aid in that. So I wanted to ask you, for developing some of these non main character from the video game style classes, like you have bard, craftsman, criminal, doctor, mage, man at arms, merchant, priest, and witcher. So with the mage, I don't know. I don't know if there is a Witcher video game that allows you to play. I don't think there is. But most of the other ones, like they are considered to be regular people style classes. And I want to talk about what your thought process was for each of these classes in making them still fit within the party and cooperate with a Witcher without making the Witcher seem like the main character.
The goal was really to draw from a lot of what it is in the books, and to establish that we're looking at the world of The Witcher. It may be The Witcher, but The Witcher is not the only person in that world. In the books, Geralt travels with a whole group of people who are not Witchers, and we get to see them capable of doing their own things. And in the same way, the goal was to basically say, you are a main character. So if you're a man-at-arms, for instance, you are not a background soldier in the story. You are Vernon Roach or Yorveth. You are a named soldier who's got, all the cool soldier abilities that you would see from a main character in the setting. You range on things like, Witchers are extremely good swordsmen, but you have the versatility to use any weapon, and you're better at operating in heavy armor and things like that. As a merchant, you are a main character. You have, connections all over the place. You can get material and money and items for easy prices. You know what types of items are, things like that. If you're playing a bard, you can be a great face for the party, but you can also be a spy, or you could be a manipulator in the shadows, that sort of thing. So the goal was to basically take every one of these sort of everyday professions and extrapolate, what would this be like if this was the main character of the story? What capabilities would this person have if instead of Geralt being the main character, it was this person? So we tried to basically make every profession good at something, and try to fill in a lot of the holes around Witchers. Things like someone needs to be the face because everybody hates Witchers. And, somebody has to be able to fix your stuff because your average Witcher is not, an artisan. So you need a craftsman. Somebody needs to be able to, do the magical research. And, maybe somebody wants to be sort of like the man of the people priest who manipulates people through their belief. So every profession has something it can do, and they often fill in the gaps that a Witcher can't do.
Yeah, I'm just thinking to myself, like, for Cyberpunk Red and for Witcher, it seems like, and I can speak on this at least from the cyberpunk aspect, it is more challenging for a GM, in my opinion, to run Cyberpunk than it is for 5e because there is more class depth for someone's speciality. And that sort of allows a different world for them to inhabit on the same team. And I think that can be a greater challenge for the GM to bring to life more. But I do appreciate the depth there. And that's one of the reasons why I do like The Witcher and Cyberpunk, was that you can be the master of whatever your specialty is on the team. Whereas in some other systems, it just feels like everyone kind of does very similar stuff. Or you basically have everyone's a spellcaster in the party, so on and so forth, and that sort of interconnectedness because of the reliance on the other team members can be really lessened for that reason. So I do really like that about the system itself. The other thing that I wanted to ask about Witcher was, in your testing or in your own experience, I don't know if you have been running a Witcher campaign for a while, but what is the average campaign do you think that the system best supports? Or do you think that it can be either short or very long? What's your opinion on that?
Um, I think it can be. I think it can be both. Generally, when I have run Witcher campaigns in the past, they tend to be fairly long. Um, I think that I have a sweet spot somewhere around 20 sessions, which is I think where I tend to run. Um, just because that gives you a good amount of gameplay, but it doesn't get too long. I've run multi-year campaigns and stuff like that, but my groups just don't tend to do that very often. Um, but Witcher will work for that. I think it just because of the nature of it, you get the longer you run, the harder it gets in certain circumstances because you get better and better skilled and you kind of earn your way to the top, but there's more of a chance that you're going to get grievously wounded or something like that. And that can add to a lot of sort of character narrative, which I've always enjoyed. I've always felt that if you get to the end of a campaign and your character is the same as when you started, you've kind of failed. Because that character growth is really important in my opinion for playing the character. Um, but yeah, I think basically it can go either way. One shots are really good if you just want to have a short, fast experience and you want to be able to experience the whole game without being too afraid of your character dying or something like that. And longer campaigns are really good if you want to have the full experience of playing that longer game, making enemies, encountering the sins of your past, having an effect on the world around you, um, for that sort of experience.
So shifting from Witcher, at least Witcher that's been produced in the past, and so I noticed a message in the announcement channel in our Telsorian Games Discord. So there is a supplement being worked on for Witcher, correct? For
Yes.
tabletop? Okay. Are you allowed to say anything about it?
I can say it is called Untold Tales. It is a book that Mike and our writing team for Witcher have been working on. And it is effectively an adventure book that contains a number of adventures tied to other professions. So, as you were saying, on professions other than Witchers, every adventure in this adventure book is tied to a different type of profession and a different type of adventure. So, these might be adventures where the craftsman shines the most, or adventures where you would really need a merchant, or adventures where the priest will get a lot of action. These kinds of like missions that exist in a world not entirely dissociated from Witcher's shine, but adventures that show more of like the everyday and the less monster focused nature of the setting.
That's a great, whoever's idea that was perfect. That's That's exactly what a GM is looking for, because it can feel like, especially when players come into it with like, okay, well, we're gonna hunt monsters. You hunt a few monsters, and then you're like, okay, well, what else does the game provide? So I think that's a really great toolkit for a GM. So A plus on that idea. I'm looking forward to seeing that. My next question for you, as we are starting to wrap up here, um, you've been in the industry for 6, 7 years, right? When's the first time you published something?
I
Ish.
published something in, let's see, 2018, I think is maybe
Okay.
2016 or 2018 was when Witcher came out. So it's been somewhere around 8, 9 years, something like that.
So I have to ask then, what are your goals and dreams moving forward? Do you have other projects you're looking at doing now that Shadowscar is finally like seeing the light of day? Are you just going to ride Shadowscar for a while and work on that? What are you looking forward to doing in like the next 5 to 10 years?
My goal is to really bring Shadowscar to life. It's something I've been working on in my own time for a really long time, and I've got big plans for it. I want it to really be a well supported line with a lot of cool stuff in the future. I do my own design at home, which I maybe will go somewhere at some other point. I'm working on, I think, 3 other small games in my free time, cycling back and forth. But all of those are mostly just kind of fun home things I'm working on. My real focus is on Shadowscar because it's, like I said, it's something I've been wanting to do since I was very, very, very young, and now having the opportunity to make it a reality is really kind of the thing I want to focus on most.
Great. That's wonderful. Yeah, pursue the thing that you've been working on. Um, as we're wrapping up here, where can people find you, and how do they get in touch with you if they need to?
So we can be found at our website, ourtelstoriangames.com, as well as our Telstorian store, which is where you can find all of our products. We have all of our various social medias, so Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, all those, where you can just look up our Telstorian Games. You should be able to find us, no problem. The Kickstarter can be found at Shadowscar Core Rulebook on Kickstarter. Love for people to drop by and check it out. DLC can be found on our website or a drive-through RPG where you just look up our Telstorian Games. And that's, I think, everywhere we can be found.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for stopping by, Cody, and I wish you the best.
Thank you very much.